When you're watching a movie, the ratings let you know what's appropriate for kids and the kinds of images you might see. But some critics say films that center LGBTQ+ relationships are treated differently. Today, are queer romances being hit with tougher ratings? I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Now, there's at least a couple of movies out there that have critics buzzing, but not for the reasons you might think. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a film adaptation of a YA novel of the same name. It tells the love story between the son of a U.S. president and a British prince.
Do you ever wonder who you'd be if you were an anonymous person in the world? Who would you be? Be a writer? Live in Paris? Certainly date more.
Yeah, because it's so hard for a prince to get a date.
People I date don't interest me, and the people who interest me, I can't date.
Oh my God, who doesn't want to watch that? And like most romantic storylines, Red, White, and Royal Blue contains intimate scenes. But nothing too graphic, no full frontal nudity, and things are more suggested rather than shown. But it was enough to get it an R rating in the US, which means anyone under 17 has to go with an adult to see it in theaters. It also comes on the heels of another queer romance, Passages, which was hit with a more severe NC-17 rating. That means no matter what, if you're under 17, you cannot see it in the theater in the US. Now, some critics are asking whether there's a double standard. Are films like these being treated differently? Here to unpack all of this is Jenna Benchetrit. She's written about this for CBC News, and she's in studio with me. Hi, Jenna.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Okay, Jenna, before we get going, I just want to say this conversation is going to drift into more mature themes, so just want to give anyone who's listening a heads up. We're going to talk about some racy stuff. So can you just let us know very quickly what is Red, White, and Royal Blue about, and also Passages? Just give us a sense of what these two films cover.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Red, White, and Royal Blue is a romance between the son of a U.S. president and a British prince. When the film starts, these two characters, they have a bit of a history, but they really don't like each other.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I always love that.
And they sort of have a mishap at an event together. And because of that, they have to go on this sort of like public apology tour to kind of save face. And through that experience, they end up getting closer and falling in love. And Passages is about a married gay couple whose marriage is kind of thrown into disarray when one of them starts having sex with a woman.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Very steamy, very exciting.
Yes.
So, controversies like this are not new. I think I've been hearing about the R and the NC-17 rating my entire, adult life, and as a kid too. So what is it about these two movies getting hit with restrictive ratings that has struck such a chord that made you want to write about it?
Yeah, I mean, these obviously are two films that have queer characters at the center, bisexual characters specifically. And I think, there's been this environment in the last 10 years or so where we've sort of drifted away from sex in Hollywood film. We're far away from the heyday of like 80s and 90s erotic thrillers where that was really common.
I know, Basic Instinct, so good.
And so there's this perception that the MPA, which is the organization in the U.S. that hands out these ratings, has sort of held a double standard against queer sex in particular when giving out this classification.
So you just mentioned the MPA, the Motion Picture Association of America, and that's who hands out the ratings for these films in particular. Yeah. But it's different depending on where you live. So is there something specific about the U.S. system that leads to these kind of stricter ratings?
Yeah, so the MPA is a self-regulated organization, and it's actually run by 6 major studios in the U.S. So that would be Netflix, Disney, Paramount, Universal, Sony, and Warner Brothers. And the difference is that because it's not government regulated, they really don't want to push the system towards that. So they tend to be harsher in rating their own films and in films of other studios because they don't want this system to be moved into, government regulation.
Oh, that's so interesting. So in an effort to sort of curb government influence, they're being harsher than they maybe need to be.
Exactly.
So in Canada, Red, White, and Royal Blue actually has a 16+ rating on Amazon. How is it different here than in the U.S.?
Yes, so the Canadian system is actually regulated by the provinces. So it differs from province to province, but much of them have a film classification board that hands out separate ratings. So, the NC-17 in the U.S. would be equivalent to the R restricted here. 18A in Canada would kind of be equivalent to R, roughly equivalent. And that's really the main difference.
And you in your reporting, talk to people in the film community who are saying that MPA has applied double standards, is applying double standards with these two films in particular. What are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think to understand the conversation, we kind of have to describe the two films and what we're seeing.
Yeah.
In the case of Red, White, and Royal Blue, there's no full frontal nudity, and a lot of the sex is actually very much implied. In the case of Passages, also no full frontal nudity. There is maybe a slightly more graphic sex scene, but people are generally saying that, there is a double standard being applied here because these are the type of scenes that we would see, heterosexual couples engaging in other films, and they probably wouldn't receive the same type of rating.
Right. I mean, you see more in an episode of Gossip Girl, probably, right? You've seen both the movies.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is the criticism justified?
I really think that in the case of each of these movies, if I were handing out these ratings,
yes.
I would probably give each of them a step below. The director of Red, White, and Royal Blue spoke about the fact that he was actually aiming for a PG-13 rating. So he sacrificed maybe a lot more of the graphic sex scenes from the novel in the film. And you can really feel that when you're watching it. It's really not that graphic at all. So I do think, personally, if it were up to me, I would have given them a lower rating.
We need you getting those ratings. But now there's a long history of this, of LGBTQ plus themed films, having extra scrutiny from ratings boards, of just being a bit more under the microscope than usual. Can you give us some other, notable examples?
Yeah, so Boys Don't Cry in 1999. Kimberly Pierce, who was the director of that film, actually talked about her dealings with the MPA in this 2006 documentary. This film is not yet rated. And she spoke about how, the sex scenes between the main character, who's a trans man, and his love interest, his female love interest, were actually rated more harshly by the MPA than the brutal violence that comes afterwards in the film. So that kind of gives you a sense maybe of other filmmakers who've spoken about that double standard. Blue is the Warmest Color, another example. Bent. Actually, the first film to ever be handed an NC-17 rating was Henry and June in the early 90s. And that film as well starred a heterosexual couple who get involved with another woman.
Wow, that's kind of shocking to hear. And I think the part about violence is so interesting because you go to movies with kids and there's so much violence and you think, like, why is that okay? But, a kiss or whatever is not. But Jenna, it's not like kids need to sneak into a movie theater anymore. Those kinds of ratings, do they necessarily hold the same weight in a streaming world when you can just watch this, like you mentioned, on Netflix and Prime? Do ratings still matter in the streaming era?
Yeah, I don't know that they hold as much stock for audiences now than they used to, right? There's also this idea that there are a ton of, social media influencers who, could hand out their own ratings. There are a lot of parental guides online. You don't necessarily need to turn to this, organized body for film classification anymore. So we really are in a different era where these things maybe aren't as important as they used to be.
Do you imagine that they'll just disappear?
I don't think so. I think, you know, as long as these studios want to, you know, as long as these studios sort of are aiming for a wider appeal, you know, a broader appeal to make money, I think that the ratings actually hold an importance, at least for their purposes.
Okay, it's so interesting, but it kind of makes me want to watch these movies more.
Yeah.
Does that ever happen? Like the opposite effect of these ratings kind of inspiring younger people to want to see what's so racy, what's so bad that I'm not allowed to even go?
I do think publicity plays a big part of it. You think back to Blonde, you know, last year in fall 2022. That film got an NC-17 rating, but it was sort of welcomed by the director. You know, he spoke about it a lot because it kind of gives a film a certain cachet. If you're inviting a particular audience to see a film that is racy and that is risque, that could actually bring more eyeballs in.
Well, Jenna, thank you so much for being here and chatting about this with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jenna Benchetrit is a web and radio journalist for CBC News. You can watch Red, White, and Royal Blue on Amazon Prime now, and Passages is currently playing in select theaters. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. Okay, we're going from queer romance to the racy world of romance novels. If you've ever dipped a toe on the book side of TikTok, you already know it's pretty spicy. It's a space for romance fans to leave thirsty reviews of their favorite leading men. But those characters are usually fictional. It's not a real person. So what happens when that community turns its attention to a real NHL hockey team? Well, it happened. It was fun and it was celebrated on both sides for a while until one hockey player and his family pretty much begged for it to stop. They said some of the thirsting had crossed a line into sexual harassment. Elamin asked a couple of very smart people to unpack the story. Stacy Lee Kong is a culture critic and Farah Heron is a romance writer. Their conversation started with Stacy's rundown of what happened.
Okay, just brace yourself because it's kind of a wild ride.
Okay, ready.
Okay, so last year, the Seattle Kraken starts referencing BookTok on its official TikTok account. So one of the earliest videos, it's a forward Alex Wenberg. He's sipping water and the caption is, "What is BookTok and why do they like Wenny so much?" This obviously goes viral. BookTok loves it. They think it's hilarious. The actual, like, Wenberg actually becomes like a key character on BookTok. People really go hard for him.
So this is just a guy who plays hockey for this team.
He's just a guy. He plays hockey. He's like tall and blonde and hot. Like
Sure.
There's nothing objectively confusing about why people are like, oh, I like this guy.
Got it.
But he just becomes this like character on BookTok. The team continues to lean into that content. They obviously see the value. So they change their TikTok bio to mostly BookTok, and they start sharing more videos that are like obviously designed to appeal to BookTok. So there's a slow motion clip of Wenberg and another player. They're wearing suits. And the caption was, "When you accidentally become a BookTok account and now that's all you can post."
That's how deep the NHL hockey team's TikTok got into
they
BookTok.
Are going
They just became
hard.
a BookTok. Okay, all right.
At the same time, there's this other creator. Her name is Kiera Lewis. She's really big on BookTok, and she's especially known for going deep on sports romances. So her videos are often quite explicit. They often center on her attraction to fictional characters, but also sometimes to real hockey players.
Okay.
And Alex Wenberg becomes one of them. So in the spring, she makes a fairly racy video, now deleted. It goes viral, super viral. Everyone's laughing, ha ha ha. And in fact, after that, the Kraken invites her to a playoff game and they give her a custom jersey that says BookTok on the back. Mostly BookTok was enthusiastic about the whole thing. The internet thought it was pretty funny. People were writing about it. Like the Kraken as an organization, obviously were fine with it. But then in July, Alex Wenberg's wife, Felicia, posted a series of Instagram stories. And she said, "Listen, initially, I thought this was funny. It was all in good fun. But now I'm actually uncomfortable with these explicit comments." She's asking people to stop posting sexualized content about her husband. And then Alex Wenberg releases a statement, and he says that some IG users in particular had crossed a line because they were leaving comments which he described as vile on his wife's Instagram account, including on photos of their baby.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. So, too much. So what's important to note here is Felicia Wenberg didn't name any specific creator. She didn't call anyone out by name. But Kiera Lewis really became the face of BookTok in this kind of situation because she included a clip of one of Lewis's videos. The team responds pretty quickly. They stop creating that content, obviously. They scrub their account of any reference to BookTok. Kiera Lewis makes a few public statements about how she feels betrayed and how it's not fair and how she's like being treated kind of poorly by the organization and by kind of the public in general. But the story is not over. Like that happened last month. We're still talking about it. And I think it's because it brings up a lot of issues. It brings up the issue of consent. It brings up how companies try to capitalize on kind of niche communities, whether they can do that responsibly or not. There's like issues around or conversations around female desire, which people are really uncomfortable with. It's just like lots happening in this very messy package.
Thank you for spending that time explaining this mess. Farah, I hate to ask you this, but can you just talk about how horny BookTok generally is on like a regular day? Like, just give me an overview here.
So BookTok is super horny. It's funny. TikTok goes through trends with what's popular in the book environment there. And for a while, it was all about horny fantasy romance. And then it started going into extra spicy contemporary romance. And it just kind of, they feed off each other because when one person gets excited and you know how the algorithms work. When you see something, people post more and more and more of it. And hockey is having a moment on BookTok. But as a whole, like hockey's, it's strange when I think about it. I'm a Canadian. I was like, yeah, hockey is just there. We don't really care much about it. But hockey is actually the biggest sports subgenre in romance.
Really?
And outside of Canada, like it's not just Canadians reading it, which to me, I'm like, oh, a bunch of Canadians must be reading it. No, it's places where hockey isn't the most popular sport. So in the US, I was just reading something about Australia that BookTok has made people interested in hockey in Australia because before it wasn't a very popular sport.
So maybe this gambit kind of succeeded a little bit too much in a way. Stacey, can I just come back to this really murky situation? Because there are so many sets of relationships to be clarified here. For example, we don't know a lot about the business relationship between the Seattle Kraken and this influencer, Kiera Lewis, who's kind of become the face of this thing. What are some of the questions still left to answer?
So we don't really know how official the relationship was. We don't know whether Lewis was paid for any of the content she posted. We don't know what the team's expectations are. We don't know if there were any contractual obligations. Like, we just don't really know. And that, I think, is actually really important because it speaks to what I was saying before about the challenges of companies trying to capitalize on these niche communities, is that it can't actually be super cash. Like, if you want to market your team by engaging with the community, you actually do still need the same contracts and the same very clear expectations as in any other business relationship. Mm-hmm. And what Farah was saying about, I think I read the same story. I think it was in the New York Times where they were saying ice hockey, not that popular in Australia, but their professional teams have actually explicitly credited BookTok with increasing game attendance and fan interest. Like, explicitly, they have said it's because of BookTok. So you can see that there's a value. There's a value of being like, oh, here are these people that are excited about a thing. Maybe we can use that. But it really speaks to, are you going to do this responsibly? As a company, are you going to lay out clear expectations? We don't also know how much conversation there was between team management. Like, how much did the organization tell the players? Did the players understand what this would be? Were there clear boundaries at the beginning about what could and could not be said? Were there any protections in place, or was there any conversation about what would happen if things went off the rails? Because things go off the rails on the internet all the time. Like, we just don't know. And I think this is a really big cautionary tale about what happens when you don't have those clear guardrails.
I think on a base level, Farah, we're all kind of broadly familiar with thirsting. Like, that's not new. But the idea that you can sort of inject yourself and that person into much closer contact in ways that maybe you were not able to before, that's the part that makes it uncomfortable. To that end, listen, there are no official rules for how to thirst responsibly on the internet. I think we should make some. Farah, how would you approach it? How do we create some boundaries around this thing?
Yeah, I think the think about people as being people. I'm all for BookTok finding that safe place and expressing female desire and that place where they can talk and just be free with things that as women that we've kind of been socialized not to talk about a lot. So I'm totally for it, but I think we need to remember that BookTok is not a private room. And so I think you have to, I mean, there's the old, when I'm an old person and when we started going on the internet and social media, like anything you wouldn't say in a job interview, you don't put on social media. Now, at this point, I think people have kind of relaxed that kind of strict rules a little bit. But I think you have to remember that even if the only people you're encountering and the only people you're communicating with are people from within your community, that doesn't mean that the rest of the world doesn't see it as well. And going right back to the things that we learned in kindergarten, treat people the way you want to be treated. So imagine yourself in that person's shoes and how would they feel about seeing something like that? You can thirst in ways that are not overly explicit or not very sexual harassment-y. Or, you know, what you can do is you can thirst on characters. Like authors are creating make-believe people for you to thirst all you want. You can do whatever you want. You can write and talk about anything you want about these make-believe people. But when you're talking about real people, you're crossing a line.
Stacy, what about you? What are the rules for you?
I think you should not actually tag anybody in your thirst. Like, I think even if you are thirsting after a real person, because I'm like, I love fandom. I think fandom is so fun and so interesting and such an interesting sort of space to explore. But like, you don't actually have to go to someone's front door and be like, hey, guess what? Guess what I would like?
Talking
like, you
about
have to
you.
Do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. If they go searching for it, that to me is a different thing than you going to them. I think the other thing that I really want to emphasize is that consent can be withdrawn at any time. Like, that is actually a key and fundamental thing here. So even if Alex Wennberg consented initially to be part of this marketing campaign, it's actually okay for him to say, I don't want to do this anymore. It has gone too far. It makes me uncomfortable. And if it didn't make him uncomfortable, but it made his family uncomfortable, like, it actually doesn't matter. Because there was some conversation about, like, you know, because he said it was okay at the beginning, like, you should expect that this happens, whatever. Like, yes, the company absolutely should expect that this would happen. This is what happens on the internet all the time, just in terms of things going, you know, where you didn't expect. But the key point is, if someone doesn't want something anymore, that's okay.
The amount of lessons to be drawn from this are so many. Stacy, Farah, thank you so much for being on the show to talk about probably one of the messiest stories that we've had this year. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Farah Heron is a romance writer. Her novels include Accidentally Engaged and The Chai Factor. And Stacy Lee Kong is a culture critic. She writes a weekly newsletter called Friday Things. We wanted to go out on this song today to pay tribute to Clarence Avant. Clarence died Sunday. He was 92. Clarence was a legendary figure in the music industry, known as the godfather of black music. He was a record executive, label owner, and mentor to many stars. He discovered and signed Bill Withers, who you're hearing right now. And he was instrumental in the careers of Quincy Jones, Whitney Houston, Pharrell, and many, many other stars, athletes, and politicians. Pharrell himself posted a really powerful and touching tribute on Twitter. He said, quote, Clarence Avant was a visionary and a transcendent spirit. He is the ultimate example of what change looks like, what architecting change looks like, and what the success of change looks like. He stared adversity in the face in climates and conditions that weren't welcoming to people that look like him. Pharrell also went on to say, he showed what we can be, what we can do, and how much more we can all achieve if you give us opportunity. There's a documentary of Clarence's life called The Black Godfather on Netflix. I highly recommend you check it out if you get the chance, because there is so much of Clarence's life I just can't get into. Clarence Avant has died. He was 92. And that's it for the show today. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thanks for listening.